Hey, Elizabeth.
Hi, Deb. Has Jenny contacted you? Okay. So I'm filling in for Jenny today.
Okay.
Jenny had to go to the hospital last night.
Oh no.
On a gallbladder. She's back home now and she's resting. And she's meeting with a surgeon tomorrow. That is what I know.
She's okay. They just probably have to take her gallbladder out.
That's what I'm guessing. Yes.
Okay. Oh, bless. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So I've had just a little bit of communication with her husband. Sounds like she's okay, but probably was in a lot of pain.
That kind of stuff is horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And okay, I briefly read what you're talking about today.
So we'll just wing it. I have a PowerPoint.
Okay.
My understanding is I'm just supposed to talk about why we tell the story of campus ministries and how.
Yes, that sounds like what I read. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So not knowing what it's been like before, I mean, I guess, is it helpful for me just to spend 5 minutes saying, this is my context, here's the PowerPoint, just for some broad theological, practical pieces, and then just a ton of time for questions and thought?
Yeah. What we've done is Jenny's usually introduced the speaker, and then we might go around and say names for introductions. I think it would be helpful for you to tell us about your context, since I don't know it.
Yeah, right. And then do you work at the national office with Jenny?
No, I am the UKirk campus minister for University of Memphis and Rhodes College. I just serve on the board.
Fun. Not
Yes.
just to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. That's great.
I'm the secretary.
Okay. And you're also a campus minister.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yes.
Great.
My other job is I'm the director of young adult ministry at Idlewild Presbyterian Church in Memphis.
Oh, fun. Yeah.
So
you're constantly telling people, okay, there's campus ministry and young adult ministry and youth ministry, and it's not all the same.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. What do you do?
Now I serve as an executive presbyter in Flint River.
Oh, okay.
But our presbytery is one of the smallest presbyteries with the biggest budget for campus ministry, and I was a campus minister for more than half of my life. I mean, so was a campus minister and served as a campus minister and presbytery staff. And so our presbytery just has campus ministry in its DNA in beautiful ways that I have nothing to do with. It just kind of lucked out.
Yeah.
I got to build on a lot of beautiful vision from people that went before me. And I'm not really sure why. I don't know how Jenny got connected with me. I mean, I'm glad, but that's the short answer. It's just, and I can go into a little more detail, but I just didn't want you to have to hear it twice.
All good. Yeah, I don't mind hearing things twice.
Yeah.
Well, that's super cool. It's also really cool to hear about a presbytery that has funding for campus ministry.
Right. And I know it is weird. I don't think I've ever heard of a presbytery person that was a campus minister for I was a campus minister for 12 years. Never imagined doing this, but I keep telling people campus ministry prepares us well for being in the church today, because it is it's not the old model of get people in, rather we go out, right? I mean,
we have to be well connected with the churches in our presbytery.
Yeah. What presbytery is Memphis a part of? I should know.
Mid-South.
Okay.
Yeah. And so our presbytery funds UKirk as a part-time position. trying to figure out how to make it a full-time position.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Okay,
tricky.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So you have a board that's
Yes.
from churches all around the area that, okay.
Yeah, we do. And we recently, our board recently approved like working to make the position full time, and so we're working on creating a development task force.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And has the presbytery ever does the presbytery have some kind of campus ministry endowment funds?
No, it just comes out of the operating budget.
Okay, okay.
Hmm.
And is there more than one campus ministry in your presbytery that they support?
They also support, not nearly as much, but UT Martin,
Okay,
University of Tennessee at Martin, they have a small campus ministry, but they're also connected with their Wesley Foundation as well.
okay.
And I think it's a pastor who sort of helps lead that up. It's a very different and smaller operation than we are. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So we get the bulk of the
Funding. And as long as churches pledge and give to the presbytery, then your position at least half time. If churches will catch a vision and raise their pledge, then that will help your position. Yeah. Yeah. So getting the pledges up and creating some kind of endowment.
Yeah, working on that, and then other sources of revenue too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So not what I thought I'd be doing.
Yeah, isn't it funny how Jesus just gets in our grill and just surprises us? Yeah. Yeah. Is this your first call out of seminary, or?
It is, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I graduated from Vanderbilt Divinity in 2017.
Okay.
And then I was a chaplain resident for a year at the VA here.
Oh,
and
neat.
Started this dual position.
Okay.
So, yeah. Yeah. Where were you a campus minister?
In Americus, Georgia, it was a state school, so it wasn't a well-known school. It's just a part of the Georgia University branch system. So our presbytery tends to support state schools where there isn't a large, any type of religious affiliation, and then go from there. Yeah. So gotcha. I'm at Montreat this week for a conference. Oh, nice. So I said to Jenny, I said, I'm not really sure where there's internet or, so I'm just standing on the back porch where it's just close to internet, so that, we may be interrupted with happy children and people zooming in and out of the door, but I didn't want to do this on my bed.
Yeah. I understand. So ordinarily on Wednesdays, I think Jenny sends out like a reminder about the leadership lab. And so I'm wondering if, because that reminder wasn't sent out, that folks might have.
Right. Yeah. Well, we can wait for a couple minutes, and if people don't come on, we'll just do it another time. It's that's simple.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad to meet. Yeah.
You have someone coming in, so that's great. Drew. Hi, Drew.
Hey, Drew.
Hello, how are you all?
Good.
How are you?
Good.
Drew, tell me, where are you serving?
I'm in an ecumenical campus ministry in Fairfax, Virginia.
Oh, cool. Are you Drew Inns? Oh, okay. Yes, I have heard your name. Okay. Great.
hopefully in good ways.
Good,
not
right?
bad.
All good.
I think Jenny's mentioned you before. There's a lot of people whose names I know and faces I don't, or the opposite. But cool.
So Elizabeth and I were just chatting about the fact that we may punt and do it again later, or not.
It is up to you all. I won't be upset or anything like that, but I did want to come and
Yeah, we'll just see. I will leave that to Elizabeth Abel.
Well, it looks like we have
Discerning.
another
Yeah, if there's people coming, great.
Kristen. Yeah. Oh, Kristen is Neil. So. Hey, Neil.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm all right. Good to see everybody.
Me too.
Good to see you.
Well, we might have a small crowd, but I mean, I think that's okay. Deb, how do you feel about hanging out with a small group today?
Yeah, that's great. That's what campus ministry starts, right?
It is.
Little bits by little bits.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've for those of you, let's see, Drew, you might be the only person here who doesn't really know me. I'm Elizabeth Doolin. I'm the campus minister for UKirk Memphis, which serves Rhodes College and the University of Memphis. I'm filling in for Jenny today, who had some kind of gallbladder attack last night and was in the hospital. She's back home now and resting and meeting with a surgeon tomorrow. That is what I know. Oh, and it looks like Matt Freese is joining us as well. Hey, Matt. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah. And so I've had the pleasure over the past few minutes of getting to chat with Deb, who is going to talk to us about telling the story of campus ministry. First, could we go around and introduce ourselves, and then Deb will give us a little bit more of her background. And y'all know who I am now since I introduced myself. So I'm going to pass it to Neil.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Neil Meyer, UKirk, Michigan State, serving students at Michigan State University and Lansing Community College. I'll invite Drew.
My name is Drew Entz. I'm the campus minister at Arise Campus Ministry at George Mason University in Fairfax. And I guess I'll pass to Matthew.
Matt Freese. I am the campus minister at UKirk Tallahassee, serving FSU, FAMU, TC, and Tallahassee Community College. And we'll go with Rachel. Just quick introduction now that you've just jumped on.
Sorry, I couldn't find the Zoom link anywhere. Anyway, hey, I don't know what we're introducing, but I'm Rachel Penmore from UKirk at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
And are y'all all over the map in terms of full-time, part-time? That would be kind of fun to hear.
Part-time over here.
Okay.
I'm full-time.
Yes, Matthew, you've just started, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in Florida. So we're brother and sister presbyteries. Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
I've driven by your office on my way to Atlanta.
Rachel,
full-time.
Drew, you're full-time, Drew? Okay.
Yes.
And
I
Rachel?
am as well. I'm full-time.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. So I'm Deb. Ginny had asked me to do this a little while back, just to think about the why we tell the story of campus ministry and how. Does that sound about what? Okay. And I'm thinking the reason she asked me is I served as a campus minister for 12 years and absolutely loved it in Americus, Georgia, and did that as many of you, you cobble things together. I was an associate pastor and a campus minister for 12 years. And then after about 10 years, the position changed from associate executive presbyter to campus minister, and then eventually to associate exec and eventually exec. And the gift of all that is that campus ministry has been in our presbytery's DNA, and everything I learned is completely by grace and by stumbling. I never had a clue that I would do this. But one of the things that was so fun for me when I was serving the presbytery and the campus is just the beautiful gift of getting to travel, right? With students. And so that was one of, I think, our huge blessings, is learning how to create events where students could be fed, formed, serve, and how to make that possible. And so in the midst of all that, connecting students with congregations, we started a campus ministry endowment, have money in the budget. So there's a couple things we can do. I'm happy to just listen to your questions. I did a brief PowerPoint to talk through the hows and whats, and we can zoom through that, or you can interrupt at any time and then just leave a lot of time for questions. What do y'all think about that? Yes.
Sounds like a plan. Yes.
Okay, great. Obviously not as an expert, fellow sister in Jesus who is stumbling with the rest of us, right? So let me throw up my PowerPoint. And if you hear happy children, chipmunks, or birds, I'm at Montreat this week for classes, and I'm just really grateful that I found internet. So I zoom out. So let me share my screen. Okay, so host has disabled participant screen sharing.
I will fix that.
Thanks.
I'm making you a co-host.
Thanks.
There we go.
Great. Thank you. All right. Y'all see that okay? Mary Oliver? Yes? Great. Okay. So when we think about why do we tell the story of campus ministry? It's amazing, right? As campus ministers, you know. And so as we get ready to tell the beautiful story of Christ at work in lives, I think the first thing we do is we simply pay attention, which is easier said than done. And then we are absolutely astonished and we tell about it. Instructions for living life, instructions for being a campus minister willing to tell the good news. I think as we think about how we equip our students to tell stories, as we think about how we're telling the story as servants and leaders, simply recognizing that there's both an art and a practice. And all of us have innate gifts, which make it an art. And then, of course, the practice of doing it again and again in different ways, stumbling, learning, practicing. And a good story is always beyond ourselves. So how does the story of our campuses in Tennessee and Michigan and Florida, how do those stories connect to the stories of our amazing Savior? And then why? You all know this. We tell because we're not in the business of a transactional life. We're in the business of a transformative life. And so our ministry has purpose and meaning as we give witness to what Jesus is doing through the Holy Spirit. So to me, that's just the simple why. And then when we remember why, each of you in your own ways, right? Each of you in your own ways as disciples of Jesus can answer that why more specifically so it's authentic to who you are. But we tell it specifically, I think, because of these reasons. When you are dropped in the middle of a new campus ministry, as Matthew has just been, it's kind of like a parachute drop. And everything's brand new, which is so much fun. I mean, in some ways, it's so much more creative and flexible and nuanced because you have a blank screen and you can try anything. It can also be super frustrating and scary if you feel like you've been dropped somewhere and you don't have backup. So recognizing that it's tiny seeds and that this happens over decades often. We begin to figure out what our story is so that we can create awareness. People can't support us if they don't know what they're supporting. So how are you going to tell the story in order to create awareness in your congregations, in your presbytery, in your communities, whatever context you're in? And you create awareness not by telling as much as showing, right? you show transformation and as you show transformation, you're educating people about the beautiful work that you are doing. And as you educate, by God's grace, people will become interested, and then you figure out how on earth do you engage them. When somebody comes up and says, I was so delighted to hear about the 5 students you brought and how each of them have been touched. Those are your moments when you say, I'm so glad to hear that. Where are you? You're within an hour of our ministry. And then you get them, you make the ask. Oh, right? You make the ask, get them involved and figure out how to get them involved. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. You tell the story too, so that you can begin to develop leaders, student leaders, ruling elders, colleagues that are pastors, congregation members, but you can't develop leaders around what you need unless they know what they are being called to do. And then, of course, painting a picture that how can the ministry that you are leading transform lives? And that's where you as leaders have such a remarkable opportunity to think about, what do you see? But as campus ministers, if we're running around picking up the pizza, making sure the toilets are unclogged, and trying to balance the checkbook, and also listening to the student who was recently gone through an overdose, or the guy whose father just committed suicide, like, how can you claim this is my primary focus? It's not picking up the pizzas this week, it is listening. And how do you get people involved and paint that picture so the priorities that you feel called to follow, you can do? As a young campus minister, I spent way too much time picking up pizza until finally I said, y'all, we have 50 students in here every week and they're here for 3 hours, but the first hour I'm putting food out and I don't mind it, I love it. But I think I'm missing a chance to really be present. And all of a sudden, the board was like, well, we'll just, for a while we had volunteers, and then eventually paint the picture. They called somebody to come and just do that. But I wasn't clear early on that I didn't need to be the one picking up the pizza. Now, when you're starting out with no funding. But again, as you are particularly clear about what you can and cannot do and claim it, I think over time, people will jump in and say, well, we can help with that. It's a long, gradual process, but know what you feel called to do and what you're capable of. Not everybody feels called to cook meals. Not everybody feels called to counsel people in crisis. Just because you're campus minister doesn't mean you have to deal with the crises. So it's knowing who you are and recognizing the ways that your ministry can transform. And please interrupt at any time. We'll zoom through this so we can have lots of questions. Every part of our life is liminal space, but I'm particularly passionate about the fact that campus ministry, with the age, the seasons in young adults' lives, is just powerful liminal space. And the best thing we can do as campus ministers and directors is to slow down and pay attention. I think it's important to remember too, if y'all are like me, for a long time, I would see these amazing campus ministers who had programs of hundreds upon hundreds of students and had these slick videos where lives, it was Damascus Road, and I felt very inadequate until I kept at it for a little while. And I thought, you know what? Most of us do not have Pauline Damascus Road experiences. Some of us do, but not necessarily. Doesn't make it any less transformative for campus ministry to be a gentle plop, plop, or to be both and. But I think, again, for us to celebrate who you are, the way you are, and the way your ministry operates, rather than thinking it has to be, really, really hoo-ha, rather than gentle and steady and focused. It can be all of those things. So celebrate what you are rather than lamenting what you're not. And again, as a leader, is just to think about the ways that you are creating an environment so that students are learning the rich practice of telling stories in a rigorous and reflective way. Now, obviously, we're not going to say, okay, we're teaching you how to be storytellers in rich and reflective ways, right? But as you prepare to take them to worship services, what are you doing to prepare them not to give voice, not to put your voice in their mouths, but how are you creating a context and a space of holy reflection? How are you equipping them to reflect together? How are you paying attention to the gifts? Who's the one that loves to write but doesn't want to stand up in front of everybody? Who's the musician that can play the flute beautifully but doesn't want to speak? Who's the artist? Who's the one with the story that loves to speak but is maybe a little too focused on themselves rather than Jesus? How do you begin to equip them? So those are just some things to think about. When I think about the practices of equipping our students, I think about how do we pay attention to them in the way that Jesus tends to us, right? The disciples are on the hill with Jesus, said, hey, could you not stay awake? So I just think, how do we tend to our students? And again, that's paying attention to ourselves and how we are mapping out our days and spending time. So pay attention, slow down, pay attention, stay curious, right? Jesus always asked a zillion questions. What do you need to ask your students to learn who they are, where they feel connected to God, where they feel very distant from God, where they're doubtful and scared? How do you ask questions and keep a space so that they can ask you a zillion questions? I would say another practice for storytelling is we lose expectations that Christians or believers or students look a certain way. I mean, that's just absolute malarkey, right? I would actually say it's absolute bullshit. Because, right, that's the other thing. We need to feel free to curse and to pray if it's appropriate in your context. It's not appropriate in everybody's context. It was certainly appropriate in mine. Lose expectations of what a ministry is supposed to look like and what believers or doubters is supposed to look like. Jesus was always paying attention to people on the edges, the people that did not fit. And I think that's one of the gifts of campus ministry that I think is so much stronger than just the average church, right? That we can really tend to the people on the edges, the students on the edges, and then stay connected. How do you stay connected? Jesus is the vine. How do you stay connected, particularly with students that don't believe? How do you stay connected to Jesus in a way that simply loves them where they are and allows them to pull close? You know, it's the old family systems. If you pull people in too much, they're going to want to pull back. But if you just hold that rope really loose and they like what they see, then eventually they're going to want to come closer. Does that all make sense? So those are some of the practices that I think are helpful when we think about storytelling. Ginny had said, well, think about what are the elements of a good story. Authenticity, vulnerability, and awareness. And I'm happy to send this to Ginny if that would help, and you guys can have this if it's helpful. Awareness we've talked about, know your students, know your context, know who you are going to speak to, know yourself. So authenticity. John Calvin, Saint Teresa of Avila, the saints, the theologians have always said to know yourself is to know God is to know yourself. You know your biggest gifts, you know your biggest stumblings. Lean into all of them as the campus minister and make no apologies. If you are someone that hates to talk in front of people, but you are such a good listener and encourager and can come from behind, then lean into that. If you are an out front and you cannot wait to pull everyone with you, then lean into that. But just know who you are and how you can best lead. Because if we're not leaning out of the place of where we are and it starts to feel fake or plastic or smarmy, right? not only will students sniff that a mile away, any kind of storytelling that we're going to do, I mean, ugh, right? So just know, and then know your context and work with it, not against it. This can be tricky. I serve a presbytery that is fairly conservative. So we paid attention to, I think this was just, we paid attention. If we were going to a very, very conservative congregation, we wanted the students to lean into where they were. So to protect a student and to protect a congregation, we were probably not going to talk about things that would make them deeply uncomfortable. Somebody who was looking at transitioning, right? And I'm being very frank that maybe some people would think that's manipulative. I felt like it was honoring the students, where there were congregations that heard that with grace and joy, and and the student wanted to share that. That's where we shared it. But I think as you think about how can you make campus ministry last, how can it be sustainable, how can you have funding, you've got to know your territory, you've got to know your people and figure out what is the story you most want to share that they most need to hear. And it's different for everybody, right? And then empower the students. So again, you're not writing things, you're not saying things for them, you're asking them questions. What is it that you most feel called to share? What is it about our life together? And that it's always out of a place of belovedness. Even if they don't believe in God, they can certainly generally claim, I feel safe here, I feel loved here, I feel known here. So how do you empower students to speak frankly about their doubts and their struggles? Because God knows there are people sitting in the pews, whether they will say it or not, that are absolutely in the same place. And that does a lot of softening, over time. And I think that's where we get some deep connections, board members, support. So that's one particular part that I think is very powerful in our stories. Vulnerability can be super tricky, as you all know. If somebody has just told you about a moment that's going to require therapy, and we are not therapists, I mean, you guys might be therapists, right? I would always say, happy to listen, but let's find a therapist when there's really deep stuff. So if somebody's just been crying in your office and needs to see a therapist, it's not the time for us to say, gosh, we've got campus ministry next Sunday. Would you tell about that story, right? Honor pain, honor boundaries, do your good, ethical thing. And when you sense that there are powerful stories that are coming out of a place of healing and strength that will give young men and women, middle-aged men and women, depending on who's coming to your campus, that will be empowering. Vulnerability requires risk, and you may want to be the one that models that first. And what does that look like for you? But recognizing that it is risky. It may very well be risky for you to go to a congregation and say, I can't even think of but you guys can think of situations in your context. There are moments where holy risk is powerful. And then we model it, right? We practice. So we try it, and we try it often, and we often miss something, or I often missed something and did it imperfectly, and we learned, and then we tried it again. And the gift and grace of the church at its very best is when we did things that didn't fly. I mean, in my early days, we did a campus ministry after my first semester. So I'd been there for about 3 months. We had our first campus ministry Sunday. Everybody was super excited. We had 3 students. Had I equipped those students to do anything? I absolutely had not. I didn't even know what that meant. I just said, hey, it's campus ministry Sunday. All we want is for y'all to come up and just share about why it matters. There were 3 students that were loves, deeply involved. Well, guess what? That took 5 minutes, and the service was done in 30 minutes, and everybody was looking around. And it wasn't horrible, but it was a great moment for me to think through, how do we equip? They were a little embarrassed. They weren't completely prepared. The congregation was expecting this big Damascus moment. It certainly wasn't. It was three amazing young women who were deeply committed to Christ, but were kind of just thrown in. And so if we can just keep laughing, right, and recognizing we're all stumbling toward the light. And then these are just some practices which I've mentioned earlier. You know, it's hard for us to lead our students if we don't stay connected. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? It's a no-brainer, and it's really hard. And it's okay. Don't be embarrassed about it. Life is full. But just think about, how can you stay connected? What are the ways that keep you deeply connected and rooted to Jesus? Whatever it is. Maybe it's a run, maybe it's drawing, maybe it's hanging out with your friends and having a beer, maybe it's going to a monastery. Pray in the way that makes the most sense to you as much as you can. Slow down, pay attention, find the connections between the students' lives and the larger gospel story. Help them find that. And again, it's not about putting words in their mouths, but if you have 3 students getting up and saying, I don't believe, but I'm really grateful that this place lets me not believe, then the gift is you can give voice to your faith if you're supposed to say something, to say, this is why I think Jesus has called us to this ministry for these students. And you can give voice to the gospel that as it is rings true to you in the midst of doubt and darkness and pain. But how you hold the gospel in real and beautiful ways in tandem with the doubt and the darkness, I think is tremendously important. And that's why you practice. You practice with colleagues, you practice with students, and you make an event. After a while, after I'd done it for a couple years, we had campus ministry Sundays every semester, and we would have about 50 students come. Now this is years in, right? Years and years in. But we would always practice the day before, and we would have a big lunch. So of course they got food, right? Food. So we'd have a big meal right after, but we would all gather like at noon on a Saturday. And it depended on the year. Some students were early birds, so we could gather at 9 in the morning with breakfast, but others of them did better Saturday. And we would walk through the whole service from start to finish. And it wasn't about being rigid or following a script. It was helping them get comfortable with liturgy in ways that made sense. They would write it, but so that they felt proud and calm. And so we would make it an event. They would practice, we would eat, we would laugh. Students would give each other feedback. They gave each other feedback, right? I kept my mouth shut unless they said, well, could you hear us? You know, little things like that. But that was fun. And then the Sunday they would do it. And of course it would be another fun event for building community. So practice. It looks different for everybody. And then I wish somebody had said this to me when I started. I would say create an elevator speech. It's the most important. And so that wherever you are, if you meet somebody in your presbytery who says, well, what do you do and why does it matter? 3 minutes, you can say, this is the purpose of our campus ministry. This is specifically what I do as a part-time campus minister. And as a part-time campus minister, I could work 80 hours and never meet all the needs, but my particular responsibilities at 20 hours a week are to do leadership development with students, to build a board so that we have lots of people, whatever you have identified with your board, and I'm hoping you all have boards. If you don't, that's another question. But to create that speech in a way that is positive and invitational and courageous, all of which is hard when you're wondering where your funding's coming from, if you're going to have funding. And people are like, well, why do we have campus ministry anyway? Because people don't come to church, right? I mean, how can you laugh and honor it, but then continually be relentlessly hopeful? Because it matters. And when you look back, When I look back 25 years, the ways I've been in campus ministry, it has absolutely transformed our presbytery. That has had to do with all the amazing people that had visions and built buildings, and the students who have stayed in our presbytery and have become pastors. That had everything to do with all these visionaries, drop after drop, which felt like nothing was happening. So finally, as you are telling your stories and looking for leadership to support you, build allies. As your students graduate, get them involved, create an alumni board, create a way for alumni to give, have regular alumni reunions, figure out how you're going to connect with your congregations, how you're going to get your presbytery engaged more, particularly when you're part-time. And then, this is the final slide, is how do we think about broadening the conversation and commitment? And in order to do that, and I think the things that as campus ministers, we always want to look for people with all these different gifts. We want to look for the lovers. You want people on your board, and if you don't have a board, that's something we can talk about. You want to find people that can talk to a dead squirrel and love them to life. You want to find the people that really talking scares them, but my gosh, they can clean a bathroom and bring pizza. And I call them the leadership whisperers, the people that kind of can walk into a room with students and the hair rises up on the back of their neck and they go, ooh, that student right there, pay attention. Or the person that can walk around a room at a presbytery and go, whew, that person over there, they would be so good at this. Get yourself aligned with the people that can do that, because those are the people that you need all around you. And then I call it the fools for Christ, the court jesters, the folks that are always cutting up, just being silly, but can loosen us up, because we can be so serious as Presbyterians, but can help us be imaginative and think about new ways of doing things. The people that know the context. If you go to First Pres in Memphis, remember, they've just gone through a horrible split. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of division, whatever. So be mindful of that as you're bringing students. So people that can help you with that. And then of course, people that are good with asking for money. Maybe you tell the story, the students tell the story, and it's that person that gets up and says, I don't know about y'all, this is making a difference, and I can see it and I can feel it. And these are specific ways you can support with your resources our campus ministry. So those would be some of the things that your boards to have. And I'm gonna jump out of this and come back, and we can answer questions. We can zoom back to slides. I want to do whatever's going to be most helpful to all of you. That was the drive-by quick speeding moment.
One of the pieces you talked about there, Deb, was space to ask and be asked questions. So the two-way street of questions and questions. Are there questions that you had that were your go-to in those spaces with students, of questions to ask and be asked?
The question I love, I ended up training to be a coach, and if y'all can ever do any training, or actually this would be something I would be glad to do for free with y'all, is to learn how to ask. I would just say, tell me more, which is not a question, just tell me more about that. Or what do you mean by that? I tried to avoid why, right? Because why can be a value-laden question. I think I'm going to move out of my parents. Well, why are you going to do that? Even if you say it gently, there's a value there. So you just have to be careful with those. Does that make sense? Not always. So I can't really say I had go-to beyond tell me more and what did you mean? Tell me more, help me understand. What did you mean by that? So that, do y'all have any go-to questions that you really like? think every situation is so different. You'll know when you're there. You'll know, it'll just bubble up.
You also talked about storytelling and how that very first Sunday example you said, hadn't equipped the students to tell, but is there a particular story or two that still stick with you today that were told, moments that, really had an impact on people when those stories were told that you can still remember today?
Yes. So, I mean, I would say probably after 3 to 4 years, that's when we got our first strong core. And that was about the time we started traveling. And so by then we had some juniors and seniors, and we had a senior who's now a Presbyterian minister who wanted on her own to tell the story of her drug addiction, which was pretty bad. I mean, she would come in with, and she would show me, and I'd say, do you want me to flush them? And she would say, flush them. And so she would tell that story. And what was so powerful is that she had grown up in the faith and was snarky and funny and fierce and faithful. And so people still talk about that. And what was powerful, we had students whose parents committed suicide that would sometimes, I mean, honestly, most of our students did not do the big Damascus Road stories. They just didn't. That was very rare. Most of them talked about the way that their faith grew or changed, or they struggled, the relationships they built, the mission. But when there was the few Damascus moments, generally there was someone in the congregation that I had no clue that had struggled with the same kind of thing, and there ended up being some kind of cool little bond, and that stayed. And those people sometimes, not always, but sometimes, when we tended to those relationships and paid attention, they got pulled into the ministry a little more, because there was a place for them to remember. And in a lot of our Southwest Georgia congregations, there really wasn't a safe place for them to say, I used to be an addict. Too often we all come washed and pressed, and at least in Southwest Georgia, I don't want to speak for the rest of y'all. That's my particular context. So I don't know if that helps or not. That's, I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, that's probably, it was just learning to slow down and pay attention to the different gifts. And then the students would gather for a couple of weeks after lunches, and they would just say, I'll write some prayers. And somebody else would say, well, I'll make a bulletin cover. And this is years after, right? For the first couple of years, it was 3 people will talk, and I made the liturgy. You can only do what you can do, right? I mean, it took years before we had people that were artists, or 12. It took years. And then as soon as you have it figured out, this is another funny thing. As soon as you have it figured out, so I was not quite 30. I'd served a church for 4 years. I was in my late 20s. So the students were not that much younger, but they were all basically middle class white kids who had money and time. And so they all wanted Bible study. So this is in the late 90s, early 2000s. So that's what we did for about 4 or 5 years. And we basically sent people to seminary, mostly women. So we did seminary style Bible study. Fine. But that was for a particular class, right? They had enough money. And then all of a sudden, our university in Southwest Georgia had funding so that our Black sisters and brothers could come to college, and there were first generation students. And these were first generation students that were hungry. They came to our meals because they were working full time and going to school and didn't have food to eat. And they didn't have time to stick around and look at Greek words because they weren't going to seminary. They were trying to get a job that would help their mother and father. It was a powerful wake-up call to me. And it was also powerful because everything changed, the whole way we did campus ministry. So just, every semester it changed. So all of a sudden, the Bible studies stopped. those folks had graduated, and what they wanted more than anything was to get their hands dirty and be on the mission field. So we took trips, it was after Katrina. We went to wherever there was a little disaster nearby. We took students, and it was a whole different way of living in the Word. I was living in the Word with pickaxes and hammers. So that's just another story that once something sticks, it doesn't mean it's going to stick forever, right? We're all people that once we figured out, we think, hallelujah, we figured it out. Well, and campus ministry, as you all know, changes every single week, semester. So that was a really good learning for me, is to recognize that it changes significantly. Cell phones started. When I started, this is how like dinosaur I am. We didn't have cell phones when I started. And halfway through, we got cell phones. So that, again, that transformed the way we communicated. So.
Could you give us your elevator speech? Like coming up with one, like is something I'm working on, but we've got a ton of programs and all that stuff. So I would love to hear what yours was.
What mine was as a campus minister those ages ago. Okay, so it has been 10 years. So let me think. So I would probably say, I probably said something like, y'all, we're serving a tiny little university in Americus, Georgia, where we have students who have been in parts of family. I really hit on students who have never been to college before. And more than anything else in the world, we want to give our students a safe place to feel the love of God in Jesus Christ. As many of you know, I'm part-time. And what I do every week requires infinitely more time than 20 hours. Doesn't matter, I love it and I will pour it all in, and I know that you all want to pour it in with me. So here are some things you can do to help. And then I would just say, we have, depending on the semester, we have Bible studies. We're always in the need of, we use the message. We need Bibles, or we're going on a mission trip. Would you like to help us rent the van? I'm going right to the practical stuff right now. We need toilet paper. When we visited, we'd ask each church to do a little drive. And if we needed toilet paper or canned goods, they would have the canned goods waiting. We'd take back after we ate with them. The big thing for me was always, we want you to be a part of us sharing the love of Jesus Christ in ways that are safe and real and allow a lot of space, because I think this is the Presbyterian gift, a lot of space for questions, because we want students to engage with their whole selves, their minds, their hearts, their bodies. All of it is a gift together. And so we were all about welcome, welcome, welcome. And then I always tried to think of practical ways that a congregation could, in manageable small ways, engage in that welcome. Now, does that help at all? Invite them into it in practical ways.
All of this is really awesome. As far as communicating verbally what our story is, I'm wondering about with like marketing materials, flyers and whatnot. What are the main aspects of the story of campus ministry that you would hone in on for a flyer?
That's a great point. I just think it's so different. One thing that Jenny had asked me to show this, but I think you guys can just go and look at it yourselves rather. This is a marketing thing we did in our presbytery. If you go to flintriverpresbytery.org, click on committees, and then click on campus ministry. There's a video we did, which is not so much marketing, but it tells the story, our campus ministers and our students, of what our centers were doing. And that was specifically with the goal of raising $1 million so that we would have $1 million endowment, and so that as our campus ministry centers have doubled in the last 10 years. We had 2, now we have 4. We hope to grow more, and we fund them at about $30,000 per ministry, which, like in the dark ages, for me, that was, 2/3 of a salary. Now that's barely half, right? So you can look at that, which is about telling stories. The marketing stuff, I just think pictures, right? Purpose. And for the practical people, they certainly like to know about the programs, but I think pictures and purpose. And if you have, a couple of students saying something, for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I've been at a safe place to ask questions, or, my father died and this community rallied and loved me back to life. I think those kind of things, I just don't think it has to be flashy or professional. I mean, we don't have money, right? I mean, I wish we did. I wish, but again, authentic, and the reality is now we've got PDFs. So create a beautiful, colorful marketing piece, and then by God's grace, your presbytery can send it out in its newsletter, or churches, can send it directly to congregations. I think we can get a lot more information out much more broadly than when I started. Now, that's a gift in that there's not as much cost. It can also be challenging because there's such an information overload, right? But I do think, we didn't have Facebook when I started, but, Facebook is a way of every week, if you're featuring somebody, with your presbytery Facebook page, to say, this week we're featuring this campus ministry in our presbytery and this student, whether it's once a month or once a week. Those are some other ways in terms of marketing. And I just would keep doing the pictures and the purpose and the ask. Always ask. I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen? Somebody's going to say, oh, no, that's not my thing, or I don't have time. I mean, you love it. If you all really love this, which I'm sure you do, and are really passionate about it, you are not going to have a problem saying, well, okay, if you can't do it this year, if it's a bad year, you haven't retired yet, but you love to cook and you're going to retire in a year, could I follow up with you in a year? And then you put it in your phone for a year later, and you make sure you save their phone number, and you call them then. Because first of all, people will be so impressed that you remembered, and I just think, and you've already had the conversation once, and maybe it doesn't take the second time, but I'll tell you what, if you come back time 3 or 4, it really does start to happen. But that, again, when you're part-time, who do you get on your boards to help you do that for you? Unless you love that part. If you love that part, then you do it. But if you hate it, get somebody else. And do all of you have boards? Okay, thank the maker. Okay. That was not always the case. Good. And your boards are pretty solid, or is that a work in progress?
Work in progress.
Work in progress. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And your presbyteries, does it work that the presbyteries ask you to form the boards in a certain way? Or is it just however you want? I'm asking because we tried to make it easy for our campuses, and so we created a template of board bylaws, and we just gave it to all the boards as the campuses created, and said, here's the template, change whatever you want, send it back to us, because we want to make sure that we're clear. And that just made it a lot easier. And then it was just so that part was done. Aw. And then then it was just getting the people. So and are your presbyteries, I mean, that's another thing I'm pretty passionate. Are your presbyteries involved, or is that part of the challenge, joy?
Part of our concern was that our presbytery and we're ecumenical, so we're all over the place. But they would just assign someone to come and be on the board who really they thought they would be great at campus ministry, but they weren't really invested in what we were doing. And so we had to really put down guidelines and understandings of what it looked like. And the big thing was, the challenging part was getting people to step away from the idea that you're joining a committee at a church to a nonprofit,
Right.
and being very clear about that, and being okay to kind of hurt people's feelings a little bit. Be like, hey, there's a give and get fundraising model. You
Mhm.
have to be here. If you're not here more than half the time, it's an automatic resignation, like all these kinds of things that are in nonprofit boards.
Mhm.
Really, it hurt some people's feelings, and we didn't lose any donors because of it, but we had some people that totally would have volunteered that weren't interested in us afterwards.
And that's okay, right?
Yep.
I mean,
Oh, it was so much better
so
than
exactly. If the church, if the traditional church would get into that model, we'd be in a different place. Yeah, no, good for you. That's a good word for everybody.
Deb, you mentioned, like, I think you said grew from like 2 to 4 campus ministry centers or something. Are you talking physical spaces that are centers within the presbytery, or how did you all do that?
We had 2 campus ministries start in the 80s because of professors at state universities who were Presbyterians and had a vision. And so the Presbytery bought land and built houses, and this is back in the 80s. And so we had 2. And then when I started as a campus minister, I don't exactly remember how it started, but I started having conversations with churches in Columbus, which and Columbus has a huge university, much larger than one. And so I would say for about 5 years, they had conversations about what would it look like for us to start a campus ministry. And today they do. They rent space on the university, but they have a full-on campus minister space. And it took about 5 years of discerning and planning before it stuck. And then about, let's see, 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, a church closed maybe 10 or 12 years ago, and they had left money to campus ministry. And so we had that, but we had no campus minister and no board. And so I was super proud of our presbytery. We just held it. We didn't force it. We held it. And we kept saying, we have $120,000, but that will go very, very quickly. So we have to find somebody who, as Drew's saying, is going to have a board that's going to know how to raise money, somebody that can work part-time and has a heart for campus ministry, with a church that has a heart for campus ministry, and recognize that $120,000, if we're going to do 10,000, is going to be gone in 12 years. Now that's enough to start something, but once we had that person, and that was probably about 10 to 12 years after the funds were given, which is a struggle because sometimes you feel like, oh, we're just sitting on this money. But oh my goodness, we waited. A young woman graduated from seminary, took a call to a small church, who could not be more thrilled. And it wasn't automatic. She served full time as the pastor there. And then we started thinking, would this be a blessing? And so all the models are different. Again, they rent space, and they are on the fast track to raising funds because their funds come from a different presbytery pot. And sometimes I think it's harder if boards know from the beginning. I mean, when we created that board, they said, you are not like our other boards that get $30,000 a year, and that's all up in the air. That could be renegotiated, but right now you've got $120,000 for 12 years. So what on earth are you going to do? And man, they have just been from the start, fundraising dinners and alumni. I mean, when you're on a time frame, boy, you can move. You don't have the comfort. I mean, I had a lot of comfort starting out, which was good in some ways. Sure, I could focus on programs and deepening relationships, but yeah, I was not worried about raising money at the beginning, and I wish I had been. Does that help?
Can I jump in? There's one other piece that I have found really helpful with storytelling. I know I'm not the speaker, and so I'm probably out of line and
Not
anything like that. But one of the things that really helped me be able to get our students to talk about the ministry when we went and did some of these visits to churches and places like that was to consistently talk about our values and tell stories that back up our values in meetings. So for example, we would talk about inclusivity, and it's always positive. And so I might look and say, well, you know, I just wanted to point out, I was in one of our small groups, and Neil did such a good job of being so inclusive. I mean, Neil went out of his way to go and make sure that this new student was cared for and loved. And Neil, I just have to say thank you so much for that, because you really embodied that. And what it does is it starts getting in their mind to start thinking through those values, so that when they're talking to others without even thinking about it, they're using our language
That's great.
in major ways, and so and in appropriate ways.
No, that's a great point. And that's a great way that, again, to get back to the educating. How are you educating people on what we're about? And when the values align everywhere, whoop, there's no stopping. Do you all have other questions? Are you ready to go and do your good work in your respective places?
I've got to run right at 3:30, but thank you so much for leading this conversation. I reminded of many things and learned many more, so thank you.
Well, I was a little bit abashed about doing this. I said, Jenny, I'm old. I haven't done this in a long, I mean, I haven't, and it's a different world in campus ministry. So thank you for your grace. And I really, really look forward to hearing what y'all do next. I really would be happy to do some fun coaching. If you ever guys want to do a little like coaching one-on-one, how do you coach your students? Because you're not therapists. I wish I had known that sooner. How do you coach students to life?
Yeah. Deb, would you mind putting your email in the chat?
Oh, yeah, happy to.
Great.
And I'll also just remind you where to find that, getting back to the marketing. There's that. And if you go to Flint River Presbytery, I'll just put it here. Yeah, so there you go. Oops, sorry, I forgot the org. It's Deb at Flint River Presbytery. You got it. But you can go there and see the video. It's really a delight to see all of your faces. Jenny speaks so highly of all of you, so it's nice to see all of you. Blessings as you all run.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm happy to help if I can in any way.
Right, enjoy Montreat.
Thank you. Be well, y'all. It was good to meet you.
Bye, Deb. Thank you.
Bye.